So the H5N2 virus, American flocks have been affected, and these are different bird flocks, whether it's turkey, poultry, whatever, in Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, North Dakota, Oregon, South Dakota, Washington, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa so far. The Minnesota turkey growers have already lost more than 1.7 million turkeys, and this is kind of a hotbed of turkey growing. That's where I think Hormel is located, Jennie-O turkey, if you've ever eaten that. In Osceola County, Iowa, 5.3 million chickens are going to have to be euthanized because of these cases of H5N2. But for a little bit of perspective there, over 240 million turkeys are produced each year across 25 states. So far, we're talking about less than 1% of the overall turkey population.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot compared to all of, I mean, that's a whole lot when we think about all the birds that we eat in this country and how many of these birds have to be produced. But it's still, you know, an uncomfortable chunk of birdage that is getting sick.
Yeah, and I think it shows that we have this difficult problem that we've been talking about with, you know, basically across science about the idea that we have these concentrated animal operations. You know, it's not the same as like a concentrated animal feeding operation where you see the cattle, you know, in a feedlot and what comes along with that. But, you know, when you have the concentration of factory farming, giant warehouses that have, you know, tens of thousands of birds all packed in together, then you are going to have a problem when pathogens do enter into that factory farm system where you're going to have a lot of birds all at once suddenly being exposed to this one pathogen and no place to go.
And also, I mean, that's compounded by this new, I mean, it's not really new, but it's getting to be more and more of an issue of antibiotic resistance, right? So these farmers are using antibiotics, unfortunately, not just as treatments for disease, but prophylactically. And also, it seems that a kind of nice side effect, I guess you can say, of some antibiotics is that they help these chickens gain weight. So a lot of times antibiotics are used not even for an antibiotic purpose, and that really does promote antibiotic-resistant bacteria growing in these populations and potentially affecting us, but definitely affecting our food. Now, H5N2, just to be clear, is a virus, not a bacterium. So it's not affected by antibiotics or antibiotic resistance, but it is an avian flu, and that avian flu seems to be spreading around in America because of migratory waterfowl. So you have like a duck or something that is in the northern part of the United States, flies south to stay warm, and along the way infects all of these different turkeys and chickens in these densely packed factory farms. So, and policy is you've got to kill all of the affected animals. You know, if you find a pocket of H5N2 in your coop, then all the animals have to go. Anything that was near those affected animals have to go, which is really unfortunate. So it's kind of a needless killing of a lot of potentially healthy.
Yes, but you know that's
it's the only thing you can do.
It's the only
Don't
thing
get me
you
wrong.
can do in this particular situation.
It's
now,
the
you know,
right thing to do, but it's really sad that it's what has to happen.
It's a huge waste. You know, it's a waste of resources. It's a hugely intensive operation. You know, it has a great deal of pollution that's related to it as well, especially when you look at these poultry farms. The amount of waste that is generated and where that waste gets disposed of, and then on top of that, in these particular cases, so you're not just having, you know, your regular lagoons of manure, which is what there are now outside of these factory farms.
Very dangerous.
But now you've got, you know, the tens of thousands of birds that are now carcasses that can't be put into the food supply because they've got avian flu. They have to do all kinds of things with them. They'll be burned, or maybe they'll ground them up, put them in cow feed, because sometimes that's what they do now. They'll actually
and of course,
take this stuff.
We know about zoonotic diseases. So the idea of a zoonotic disease is a disease that can pass from one species to another. And H5N2, as I mentioned, does not seem to be the case, but we all remember H1N1, and we hear about swine flu scares and bird flu scares all the time. It's not uncommon for some sort of viral pathogen that, you know, lives in a reservoir host in an animal to eventually spread to another animal. And they call those events spillover events, and they can be really detrimental because, like, let's say the human population has not prepared for this at all. There's some sort of bird flu out there that's killing birds, and then a farm worker somehow gets infected. Something allows him to catch this virus. Now we don't have a vaccine for this virus. We don't have a treatment, and
well, it hasn't
a lot of
jumped
people get
yet,
sick.
and
this one has not,
right.
but many of them
others
do.
have. Right? It was the H1N1. I think was the one that a couple of years ago that had also.
And we still deal with H1N1 all the time. And most flus actually were, I think, zoonotic, and a lot of disease. You know. HIV was a zoonotic disease. It first occurred in primates. You know, a lot of these different kinds of viruses that have been very detrimental. Ebola, very famously. And if you want to know more about that, I definitely recommend reading a brilliant book by David Quammen called Spillover, where he really talks about all these different spillover events and why it's important to understand that the next big one could come from an animal. And we need to be, on the trail of
and nature is very inventive. Nature has lots of mechanisms in order to make sure life gets out. You know, and one of the things that jumped out about me, to me, about this particular article was how an expert on avian influenza at the University of Minnesota told Minnesota lawmakers that the disease is something that turkey growers, are going to have to deal with for several years. And she says this is not a disease we can live with and have a sustainable and globally competitive turkey industry. And the question that brings up to me is sustainable.
Yeah, how sustainable
is this when you've got a concentrated animal operation, when you have factory farming where you have to use subtherapeutic antibiotics in order to just help them survive these unsanitary conditions, just to make them grow faster because you have them living in filth.
Yeah, with no space to even move.
With no space to move, with absolutely no exposure to air, light, water, any of that. That, to me, is where the sustainability question really lies.
Something tells me that she did not mean environmentally sustainable, but instead meant sustainable from a profit perspective.
Yes.
Which is
not
also,
where we are right
now. Not what I'm that concerned about, to be honest. And also remember, there are government subsidies that are given to these farmers. So if the birds get sick, they have to put the ones that they know are sick down. They don't get anything for that. But if there were birds that were close to the ones that got sick and they have to put them down kind of prophylactically, they actually get subsidies from the government. They pay for each of those birds that they have to put down.
Well,
because that's policy.
That's probably a good idea then, if you're going to, because otherwise
it incentivizes them to do that.
To do that rather than to not, and say, well, this bird is marginal, so I'm going to go ahead and put this bird into the food supply.
Exactly.
So, we've been in that fashion. I think that kind of subsidy is actually a useful thing.
But do keep in mind that if you were to eat a bird infected by H5N2, there's no evidence that you would actually catch the virus yourself. And that hasn't happened. There's no evidence that that will happen. And of course, that scenario is a scenario that I bring up because I think it's an important one for us to be ready for. But I don't want to fearmonger and say that you're going to catch H5N2 because
you're not. That's not what's happening right now. So.
Exactly.